Okay, we're live.
Hi there. We're trying something a little different tonight with the South Shore Council of Canadians. We've teamed up with the town of Mahone Bay to bring you a session that's called Inequality and a Just Recovery. And we'll hope that this experiment is worthwhile, and perhaps we can do some other sessions this way soon. I'm going to introduce the panelists, but first of all, I want to turn it over to Mayor David Deviney, Mayor of Mahone Bay, as they are co-hosting this session with us. And David can bring you greetings.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad that you're able to join us tonight in this activity. Over the last couple of months, Mahone Bay Town Council has been working with the Mi'kma'ki residents of the area. And in talking with the elders, we were able to craft a welcome that recognizes the role of Mi'kma'ki in our community. And I would like to begin tonight by acknowledging that Mahone Bay is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This municipality and all of the peoples who reside in it and visit the area are beneficiaries of the living peace and friendship treaties, which were signed between the British, the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, and the Passamaquoddy. These treaties hold the ongoing shared responsibility to respect, cooperate, and coexist with each other and the land. I extend to the Mi'kmaq people my respect and my desire to build a stronger relationship in the spirit and intention of these treaties. So, Chris, I will hand it back to you, and perhaps you can introduce our panel members.
Thank you, David, for doing that. Yes, so I didn't introduce myself, but of course you can see the names there. I'm Chris Hyde. I'm with the South Shore Council of Canadians, and I'm going to be the facilitator tonight. I've asked each member of the panel to address a topic, which is inequality and a just recovery. And just a little bit about that from the Council of Canadians. This is something that's on our website. The pandemic has exposed and entrenched the deep inequalities of our existing economic system. We need a just recovery that puts people first instead of corporate elites. The Council of Canadians is part of a groundswell of hundreds of organizations demanding a just recovery for all. We can't go back to normal. We must find a better way. 73% of Canadians expect a broad transformation of society, but how do we make it happen? That's a question that Council of Canadians posed. And here in the South Shore, we decided to take a municipal route to looking at that. So what we asked each of our panelists to reflect on was inequality and a just recovery. As we move towards a COVID-free world, how can municipalities better respond to issues such as poverty, climate change, discrimination, affordable housing, transportation, and a sustainable local economy? So those are our 6 topics that we have, and we have 6 wonderful panelists here to address those topics. But for anyone watching, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can comment and ask questions after our panelists speak, or even while our panelists are speaking. I'll be keeping an eye on what's coming in on the chat function. But I've offered each of our panelists 5 minutes to reflect on a particular topic. I'm not going to be ringing a bell or anything. You can take as much time as you need. But we're going to speak in this order, so I'll just introduce all of them first. Well, actually, I'll introduce them in the way you can see them, presumably on your screen, as I can as well, which would mean that immediately to my right is Francis Kenyatta, who's the Deputy Mayor of Mahone Bay, and has agreed to address the subject of discrimination. Beside him, Lisa Ryan. Lisa Ryan is a housing rights activist, and she will speak to affordable housing. And then if you're looking at the same setup that I am in the bottom row, Elspeth McLean-Weil is representing the Wiles Lake Farm Market and has been asked to address a sustainable local economy. Beside her is Art Fisher, and Art is with the well, so many different places, but the Family Service Association of Western Nova Scotia, and has agreed to address homelessness and poverty in our area. David Deviney, who you've already met, Mayor of Mahone Bay, is going to speak to the environmental concerns. And Casey DeLong, at the far right, is a municipal councillor with the municipality of the District of Lunenburg, and I've asked her to speak to transportation. So those are the topics. To get a kind of a random order of things, we decided to do reverse alphabetical order from last names. So the first person to speak to us for a little bit will be Lisa Ryan on the subject of affordable housing. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to lie, I was kind of disappointed it was going to be reversed because that meant I had to be first. But I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be able to talk about affordable housing. So as you said, we're in unprecedented times. Living during a worldwide pandemic has definitely been difficult. And it's been full of change, especially for how we as communities exist and operate. But the pandemic has laid bare what activists and advocates have been saying for years. We are in the midst of a housing crisis, and it's urgent. When the safety of community relies on the ability for its citizens to be able to adequately isolate, access to housing is proven to be detrimental to social health and wellness of an entire community, everyone. According to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, housing is considered to be affordable when a household spends less than 30% of its pre-tax income on adequate shelter. Households that spend more than 30% of their income are deemed to be in core housing need. Over 27% of Canadian households are in core housing need. But let's look specifically at what's going on in Nova Scotia, because I think it's important to understand what's happening so that we can start talking about some solutions. So currently right now in Nova Scotia, 30,000 households are in core housing need. To put that in an even better context, 41,000 children, Nova Scotia children, are living in poverty. We have the third highest rate of child poverty in all of Canada. While we continue to watch the rapid decline of available long-term housing, businesses like Airbnb continue to increase pressure on an already strained housing market by purchasing up available housing and transitioning long-term housing into short-term rentals. But it doesn't just affect our housing stock. It actually affects how our housing prices and our rental prices increase. In fact, studies across North America and the UK showed that a 1% increase in Airbnb listings within a geographical area increases the local market rent as well as housing purchasing costs. So I just randomly decided, like, I'll do a little Google search just to see how many Airbnbs are listed currently right now between Lunenburg and Chester Basin. And there were well over 270 listings in an area where it is nearly impossible for a family to find a place to live in. And I can attest to that, as I moved here during a pandemic and had a very difficult time finding a rental that would allow us to have a long-term rental that was going to be past summer months, but as well would allow us to have our child because we have a child. So what can we do? The province and federal government definitely have specific roles in ensuring funding is available for the development of affordable housing. But in rural Nova Scotia's case, accessing this funding has proven to be difficult as it requires data that is well beyond what the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation provides. But municipalities have a very specific role in ensuring housing is accessible for all. And many municipalities across Canada are exploring and investing in taking steps to ensure housing is developed within their areas, because they're keenly aware that a lack of affordable housing will kill the growth of their community. If people who reside within our communities over 12 months a year cannot afford to invest in our local economy, cannot afford to go shopping at their local businesses because their income is being eaten up by rent or skyrocketing energy costs, we can expect to see our local businesses suffer and shut their doors permanently. Those businesses cannot pay adequate wages to compensate an individual to afford market rental costs in our local area. Right now, an affordable rent in our area for people who are working full-time at a minimum wage position is $625 a month. That is not possible to find in this geographic area. There are multiple ways for municipalities to encourage the development of affordable housing, and I'd like to provide just a few for some reflection. Creating different initiatives like land banks or tax exemptions for developers and nonprofits who are committed to building affordable housing and maintaining affordable housing units. Undertaking a comprehensive audit on the existing local rental or housing market and understanding the local Airbnb market. Prioritize long-term housing development over short-term rentals. One way that you can do that is limit short-term rentals to homes that the owner occupies for 200 days out of the year and allow only one property per municipality to be a short-term rental. That will mean partnering with your other municipalities to ensure that they're also aware that this is a move that you're going to be making. Advocate alongside your local NGOs and nonprofits to the province to ensure rental increases are adequate and they're capped, that we're not seeing excess in rental increases within our area. You can also establish data collection systems like a coordinated access system, just to better understand and provide resources to the number of households who are facing housing insecurity and situations of homelessness within your rural area. And end exclusionary zoning. Allow accessory homes like garden suites, 4 to 6 plexes that can be developed for long-term rentals, and restrict sizes of new developments to ensure adequate space for gentle density within your local area. There's so many ways that we can look creatively at ensuring that our communities develop and maintain affordable housing for all. Having diversity of housing ensures that our communities remain vibrant. We all want healthy, vibrant, diverse, and inclusive communities. But the first step, we need to ensure that everyone has access to safe, adequate, and affordable housing, no matter what their background is, no matter what their income level is. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Lisa. Thank you. Some really concrete steps there for municipalities to think about. And I know I've seen, Lisa, I don't know if you're active with the South Shore Housing Action Coalition, but they have a pamphlet that is available that lists various options that municipalities could consider. It's very, very good, I think. And but you also added some new points that actually weren't in that pamphlet that got me thinking. So we'll probably return to that topic later, but you've got us off to a good start. Thanks, Lisa. I asked Elspeth to take on sustainable local economy. It's interesting, coming right on the heels of Lisa talking about, amongst many other things, but talking about Airbnbs, you know, and the idea that we can get by with businesses that are just open in the summer when the tourists are here. Well, the tourists are not here. Who knows what'll happen after the pandemic in terms of things like tourism, but the market that Elspeth helps manage there in Wildville, I think can give us some ideas. So over to you, Elspeth, on how to sustain a local economy and any suggestions you have for municipal governments in particular.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. To talk about sustainability of the local economy in 5 minutes is really very difficult. And I appreciate following Lisa, because some of what I'm going to say really reiterates and supports the importance of housing and the importance of all elements of the discussion tonight in looking at a sustainable local economy. What I've been involved in small business here for 36 years, working in agriculture and recognizing how important that is to keeping people here and feeding people. But the idea of a local economy was probably highlighted more so during the last year. I've been in the selling local food for 36 years, and I've never seen more reaction to supporting local business as I have during the pandemic. My hope is that that will continue. it confounded me a bit that after 35 years of business, how difficult it still was to convince people of the importance of local. So maybe the pandemic will have really heightened people's awareness, and the habits that they developed in the last year will continue. But I'm going to set that aside, because what I want to focus on is talking in a very broad sense about the local economy, and really through the eyes of the work I have been involved in as a volunteer with now Lunenburg County. And in 2014, a small group of business people started to think about the sustainability of our economy in the future. And we were very concerned back in 2014. And also really the Ivany report highlighted many of the concerns that we shared. And it was from that work that now Lunenburg County began. And if we think about the sustainability of our community here, and when I'm talking community, I'm talking Lunenburg County. I've dissolved all the arbitrary boundaries that we have, and I'm just going to speak about Lunenburg County. If you think about our demographics here, and the Ivany report pointed it out well, the Vital Signs report completed by the Lunenburg County Community Fund back in 2010 and 2013 also pointed to the serious issue we have with our demographics, that we have a disproportionate number of people over 50 years of age. And by 2030, 1 in 3 of the people living in this county will be over 65. And when you think about having an economy, when you don't have workers, you have a very serious situation facing you. And so that has been the work of now Lunenburg County, has been focused on growing the population, because we saw this as one way to address the need for workers. And you can't run a business if you don't have people. And as a small business owner here, I know how difficult it is to find people. And I don't know a fellow business owner in this community that doesn't struggle with finding people. And it is because of our demographics. We have, as I said, a disproportionate number of people over 50 years of age, who many are retiring early or only want part-time work, or are easing out of their professional careers and cutting back on the amount of time that they want to devote to their career. So the population dynamic is a real issue, and it does and will continue to really affect how sustainable our economy is here. But population growth is only one component of a healthy, vibrant, sustainable community. We need good internet. We need good housing. We need options in housing. And I think Lisa has captured those so well. We need to have affordable housing to fill the need for the lower paying jobs, for single parents, for young people entering the workforce. They need housing that's affordable. And at $600 a month, I know very well that the average rent in this community is somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200 a month for just, and some of those apartments aren't very good. So we know that that's, the affordability is an issue, but we need choices in housing, not only affordable, what we classify as affordable housing, but choices for seniors, for those retiring, for duplexes, for different arrangements of housing that will appeal to people and to young people who maybe choose a co-housing, a co-op. Maybe they want to live in a condominium. Maybe they want to live in a tiny house, or maybe they want to live in, retire to their garden suite with their children. These are options that we need to make available to people. And right now, many of our bylaws and regulations limit these in such a way that really will impact on the housing issue. And I think Lisa has said it so well. But the other important part, if we're going to have a sustainable community, we need people, we need housing, we need transit. And I'm going to leave that for others to speak about. But workers need to get to their jobs. And we can't underestimate the importance of good transit, particularly for young people who maybe don't have the money or don't want to own a car. It's a very expensive option. The components of tonight's conversation contribute completely to a sustainable local economy, with a range of people, a diverse community that wants and chooses to live here. So what's the role of the municipalities in all of this? Well, I'm just going to make 2 points here. One is that I think municipalities, the role is not to create jobs. Their role is to create and construct the right infrastructure with the right governance structure around it that allows for the private sector and the not-for-profit and others to prosper and create those jobs. So I think municipalities have to pick very carefully the kinds of things they become involved in. But beyond that, if we think about an example, and I'm going to use the one that I have worked really hard on for the last number of years, along with my colleagues at now Lunenburg County, and that is if you think about infrastructure, good internet is absolutely part of the modern day infrastructure that we all need. And we certainly know the pressures that have been placed on our internet systems over the last year and the inadequacies of that system and the unaffordability for many that system holds. This is something that municipalities could be leaders in and could generate revenue from. Instead of turning all our dollars over to the private sector, there's no reason why municipalities can't be involved. If you think about municipalities being involved in having utilities, I mean, this county has great experience with that. We've got Riverport, Mahone Bay, Lunenburg with their own utilities. Why not think about this in terms of internet? And this way we can not only provide a very high quality fiber to home system that will provide the best speeds and provide it in an affordable way, because this is becoming a very, very big issue. That's just one example of the kinds of infrastructure that municipalities should be thinking of, the modern day infrastructure. And if you think back to the days of electrification across North America, it was very much the formation of co-ops in rural communities. And I consider all of Lunenburg County, even though we have towns, I know that they have internet issues as well. Maybe they didn't realize it before the pandemic, but when you have 4 people or 6 people in a house and you've got business meetings scheduled in school, then you know that the demand for bandwidth is certainly high. And the second thing that I think municipalities can do, and I think Lisa's referred to it as well, is that's collaborate with the volunteer groups in the community, with the not-for-profit sector and for the for-profit sector in addressing some of these issues. And I personally don't think that municipalities, and I'm not throwing darts at any one, but I just think it's in the nature. There aren't good systems in place for how to collaborate effectively. And I think that those are new systems, new governance structures that need to be created that would allow municipalities the freedom to work collaboratively with private sector and the not-for-profit sector. It's very awkward now. And I can give, if people want to, I can give a very concrete example about the cleanup of the LaHave River and the interest of a private individual in making a donation to that and how difficult that was to work with the municipality to make that happen. It was $1 million. Anyway, we can talk about that. So I look forward to the contribution of others in this discussion, and I think I'll leave it at that.
That's a lot to chew on there, Elspeth. I'm beginning to think, after listening to you and Lisa, that I'm noting down a number of points here, but there's a lot to think about here tonight, and we're not. I think we could do a subject panel like this on one of these subjects and probably, really dig into it. But you're raising the points, and we're noting the points, and we will get some time to discuss things a little bit beyond. But thanks so much for your contribution. I'm going to turn it over to Francis now, giving him the topic of discrimination. Francis, up to you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate this time, and I think the comments have been made that the topics we're covering will probably take, for me, I'm thinking mine, discrimination will probably take a lifetime for us to go through in terms of what the kind of learning we need to go through. So I just wanted to maybe start off by saying, whilst I know I was invited to this because of my role as deputy mayor, the comments and thoughts that I'm making on the matters at hand are my thoughts. They not necessarily reflect the collective of town council. So just thought I would put that out there. Now, talking about discrimination, I think one thing I wanted to do today will probably just lay a foundation for the conversation that will go forth. So I might not cover everything, but just try to lay a few nuggets so that we can talk about, we can have a place to start the conversation. And the first thing for me was to sort of put out a definition that I'm using in terms of discrimination and what it means to me. And this is a practice of unfairly treating a person or a group differently, unfairly treating people differently because of maybe how they look, what they do, how they present themselves. And it's not necessarily just simply what people do, but it's often about what people don't do. And unfortunately, I think, especially in North America, we've become very good and very skillful at doing the second part, not doing things, which creates a lot of iniquity. And the struggle is always, where do we start to address discrimination? One of the things, the thoughts as I was putting this together and trying to figure out what to say, I just asked myself, it's very amazing that we as humanity can send folks to space, and we even have a robot exploring Mars, but we struggle to eradicate discrimination in all of its forms, which is for me a very, very simple thing that we can do. We created it as humans. We can get rid of discrimination. And I'll put a few stats out there. Just recently, Stats Canada provided Canadians with an opportunity to share their experiences on discrimination using a crowdsourcing initiative. And although these results cannot be generalized for the general population, over one quarter, around 28% of the participants reported experiencing discrimination or being treated unfairly over the course of the pandemic. Now, you might say, well, maybe that's not very, very good science, but to me, as a person of color, it just reflects in many ways daily experiences. There were notable differences amongst the various groups of participants. For instance, gender diverse participants were almost 3 times more likely than males to report their experienced discrimination during the pandemic. Women were also slightly more likely than men to report that they experienced discrimination. When you look at Indigenous men and women, they are more likely than their non-Indigenous counterparts to report that they experience discrimination. But even there, with Indigenous folks, it was women who had more numbers. And amongst those who experienced this discrimination, most commonly reported forms of discrimination was based on race, skin color, which was around 34%, discrimination based on age, 30%, physical appearance, ethnicity and culture, and sex. And interesting enough was that in most groups of participants, they reported facing multiple forms of discrimination, not just one. So it just compounds the issue. And I think one of the things that these kinds of results reflect or suggest is that there's a significant association between the experiences of discrimination and other key social indicators. For instance, trust in institutions like police, municipal government, and creates also a weaker sense of belonging to the community. Now, this begs the question, which is why we're here. What does this mean for local government units? And I just thought maybe I'll just put it out there. Within the context of Nova Scotia, the Municipal Government Act stipulates the following purposes for municipal governments. One is to provide good government. The second one, sorry about that. My apologies. The second one was to provide services, facilities, and other things that, in the opinion of council, are necessary and desirable, and then to develop and maintain safe and viable communities. Now, I will dare to add that within that, it's also the responsibility of municipal governments to in many ways to contribute to the quality of life of its residents. And relative to this responsibility, municipal units need to work diligently to address the issue of discrimination and to ensure that there is inclusion for all its residents. And one thing that I'll put out there is that discrimination robs us of the full potential of the community by denying certain groups access and space at the table. And we're talking about sustainable communities, and I believe inclusive and communities and equitable communities are most sustainable because they ensure that everybody can fully participate, that you're really tapping into the potential of each and everyone. Now, I know the reality of this can be very hard to grasp. There are lots of areas of discrimination against gender, by gender, against racialized communities, ageism. So there are very many forms that it can become very big, and sort of wonder, where do we start? And so, as a Black person, I guess my thoughts go to structural and systemic racism to try and narrow it down, and sort of thinking about, so how can we address something like that? And I think we are in a time that this has come to the fore in many ways, and communities around us are trying to do meaningful things around that. I'm involved in the Bridgewater Anti-Racism Task Force, whereby it's a group of community individuals who've come together to try and come up with solutions. Now, how that came about was a municipal leader just being seized with what was happening around the world and saying, well, we can do different. We can start somewhere. And what do we do? Ask the community and figure things out how they go. And so what I would say, what can municipalities do? Municipalities have always been, in many ways, change agents. Even right now with COVID and the impact, municipalities are struggling with housing. They're struggling to make sure that people get the services they need. We're thinking about public health and keeping people safe. So municipalities can provide leadership if they're seized with the realness of a situation. And if we really want to do this, then it should not be a big deal. So I'll probably just put 4 or 5 points out there that municipalities can think about. One is to provide leadership and set direction for the community to address this issue. Think about addressing internally within the municipal units issues to do with systemic racism. So are we talking about representation in council and among staff? Applying an equity and inclusion lens to all policies and bylaws to make sure that they're not discriminatory. And then engaging the communities that are impacted locally to craft solutions by providing leadership and showing this is the commitment we have as council and this is where we want to go. And then truly commit to community-led change, whereby you're allowing the community that's being impacted to influence how that change will happen. So those are my thoughts now. I mean, there's a lot I could say, but I'll leave it to that. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Francis. I hope we have some other municipal leaders watching tonight, because I think Francis has thrown some good challenges out there for councils around the area. I'm going to go next to Art, and Art has certainly a long experience of reacting and assisting with issues such as poverty and homelessness in Bridgewater and around the area. So looking forward to your remarks on that topic, Art.
Thanks so much, Chris. Wow, this really builds on everything that everybody's saying. One of the ways in which we guide our work at Family Service of Western Nova Scotia is through what Francis had mentioned in terms of a structural analysis. And so a structural analysis of inequities, one of the things that means to us is that we're investigating, we're being critically reflective about how systems are operating and how systems shape communities and how that shapes individual life. So we approach things at those 3 levels of system, community, and individual. One of the ways that analysis is very helpful is because it allows us to pay attention to how systems get held in place by the profiling and the discrimination that operates at the individual level. And so we see that profiling an awful lot in our work. And so individuals become blamed for poverty, for example. And so if we take on the issue of poverty, then if we keep blaming individuals for their poverty, then we never actually address how poverty is sustained at community and system levels. And so we actually then end up discriminating against the very community members and that Elspeth identified, for example, that would need to be part of our recovery and need to be included in any kind of sustainable employment plan in our community. And then with this kind of way of this kind of analysis of like profiling and blaming the individual for their poverty, then we end up with some of the stats that Lisa mentioned, where we live in a province where in single parent families, 1 in 3 children is living in poverty. And the questions I struggle with, I think, have been pointed to by Francis when Francis talked about, what we don't do. And that a similar question I've been struggling with is, why are we okay with this? Like, what's wrong with us as a culture and as Canada that we're okay with it? And so that piece is extremely hard on my mental health this year and extremely troubling. And I just want to take a particular case because I know we could talk for hours on this topic. I want to take a particular case to show how this operates at an individual level and impacts youth in our community. And so one of the issues we see in our work, for example, is that as a province, we've invested a lot of money in trying to address, for example, human trafficking and violence against children and youth. And so one of the issues that we see as kind of a complicated one in our work is that, for example, we may end up in our work trying to support a youth who's between the ages of 16 and 18. Who comes to us because they say they need to leave family violence at home. And what happens in terms of how our system unfolds is that at that moment is that we need to then make a report on that file to Children and Family Services. And then if the youth is saying this, then potentially an investigation needs to begin. And so at that point, this youth has obviously, there are different ways we could interpret what's happening. And of course, these youth get profiled by our system and by our community. One of the pieces of profiling says that the youth simply doesn't like the laptop rules at home, or the youth just simply doesn't like following the rules at home. And, in our long-term experience of the work, we don't see youth homeless and living on streets because they didn't like the fact that the laptop couldn't be used after 10 p.m. And so, so in my experience of a number of these youth that we've encountered, at a very young age, they're making a stand against violence in their lives, and they're making a stand for justice and for equity. And so, but what happens at that point is that while the investigation into the family is going on, there are $0 for the youth for housing. $0 at all. The youth would have to go and leave rural Lunenburg County and go to a shelter. A youth shelter in Halifax or in another community far away. So we end up taking that youth away from their natural supports. And then something even more insidious happens if the investigation appears to prove that the youth's claims are not verified. If the youth's claims are not verified, then the youth is really left to their own devices. And so they can end up living in the shelter, they can end up trying to find a job. They may be advised to simply go home. Certainly we know of youth who've been told to simply go home and apologize. So personally, I relate to this because at the age of 15, I had to deal with coming out as a whatever. In those days, it was like coming out as a bizarre, disordered homosexual. We didn't even have the language of gay. So, I had to deal with the community and social kind of potential for violence in relationship to that. And so what I worry about is that, when we're trying to look at, the importance of sustainable communities and the importance of a community where we, to go back to what Lisa said, that like a lack of affordable housing kills a community. And so, I think to me, these kind of systemic barriers like we experience that we experience youth living with, that kills our rural community. What that does, if that youth did make a stand against injustice in their life, and if our system did not verify that as accurate, but it was, that youth ends up leaving the city or leaving this community, and that youth goes to the city. And we've just lost somebody who took an ethical stand at a very young age, who could become an amazing contributor to our local community. And we basically sent them away. And so I think that's beyond insidious. I think it's beyond appalling. And one of the things we're trying to do with the youth we're serving is to link youth with local education and employment supports that could help them become a part of the building of a community-based housing sector. So we started an initiative last year called Level Up. We now have fortunately just learned we've received more funding for this year, because we have two choices here. We can either pathologize the youth in our community that we often serve, or we could start to look at how their actions are a stand for justice. And then we could start to link them with supports that would actually help them get on with their lives. And in terms of actually creating sustainable communities and affordable housing and addressing homelessness, we have this amazing opportunity to then, link youth who actually have a very significant experience of what homelessness feels like, and link those youth with the building of housing, supported, affordable housing. And we know that in terms of, for example, the building sector in Nova Scotia, the median age of the current construction worker is 48 years old. We are deliberately ignoring the potential of our youth in rural Nova Scotia. And we're deliberately saying that they're not worth caring for. And I think we have really profound issues to deal with. And I really appreciate what Elspeth said about, we don't have good systems in place for collaboration. We really don't. We are competitive, we are small-minded, we are egotistical. And our towns need to learn how to stop being that way. Like, I just think it's appalling that, for example, we're struggling to have our affordable housing sites free of taxation while we're trying to develop them. It's a very simple request, but I mean, it's very profound for supporting affordable housing and moving forward. And we're struggling for the youth that we support to actually be accepted in the community and not to be profiled as criminals or suspicious hoodlums. And so I just think we have so many possibilities before us. And I think we really need to address how our systems that are intended to care for the youth in our community often are the most profound sources of violation in their lives. And so we need to address these inequities that are all around us.
Thank you, Art. It's very insightful and also very moving. I'm not sure whether we have municipal officials from other units here watching tonight. I hope we do. I see we do have about, I think it's about 30 people who are watching. And thank you to all of you. But if we don't reach our other municipal authorities tonight, this broadcast is going to be available after the fact. So we'll be sending them along, and we hope they'll take note of the subject of municipal collaboration, which has come up a number of times tonight. And from that, we segue right to the Mayor of Mahone Bay, who is not only here, but is also helping co-host this session. And David's agreed to speak to how municipalities can move towards a just recovery in the area of the environment. So David, over to you. And David, you're still on mute. Sorry.
I just saw that. No, thank you for that. I apologize. I would like to talk about what we're doing in Mahone Bay from that perspective in particular, because a lot of the things that are happening here can happen in other municipalities as well. Good to keep in mind that Mahone Bay is one square mile in size. That's it. 1,050 people, approximately, more or less. And 3 years ago, the town of Mahone Bay declared a climate emergency. We were the second municipality after HRM in Nova Scotia to do so. And since that time, we have been structuring our program and policies in light of the declaration. We've embraced a continuing focus on the environment, and we recently defined the environment as one of the 3 key tenets of our new revised strategic plan, which is on the verge of being approved once we have a discussion with our citizens for the 2021 to 2025 timeline. The underlying key to that is a greenhouse gas reduction plan that has been developed over the last 18 months in Mahone Bay, and it furthers our resolve to use non-fossil fuel sources of electricity. In particular, we have participation in a wind farm that generates approximately 45 to 48% of our electrical needs, and we're about to embark on a solar garden, which will give us an additional 12 to 17, 18% of our electrical needs. It's entirely possible that by 2030, we'll be generating 80% of our electricity from non-fossil fuel needs. Now, in order to help transition that to a reduction in greenhouse gases, we're installing electric vehicle charging stations. We've been involved with a provincial organization where we've actually been able to arrange citizens to have test drives in electric vehicles to see if they might be for them. We are sponsoring a home heating program that uses heat pumps that rely on the electricity that we're generating in our wind farm. And we've been able to partner with a firm in the private sector who provides and maintains heat pumps, and also a partner in the banking sector who is financing the acquisitions for homeowners at a minimal cost. The town is also continuing to focus on the shoreline protection plan. The rising tide levels, storm tide levels, are causing erosion on the key shorelines in Mahone Bay. That iconic view of 3 churches, you'll see in a few years will be about 6 feet underwater unless we can take the proper steps to protect it. And we are continuing to pursue and to pressure the federal and provincial governments for the financial assistance that is required to deal with that $4 million project. In the area of land management itself, council in the new strategic plan is dealing with management of the urban forest. Another issue which is on the horizon, but which council has not yet specifically addressed, but that I would like to include in this is the protection of our agricultural properties to ensure our food security, limiting of pesticide and herbicide uses because they kill far more than a handful of bugs that they might be designed to eliminate. Crop management and soil sustainability, an often overlooked issue. And finally, the protection of green spaces, parklands, recreation spaces, or just traditional forest areas that provide part of our carbon sink capacity. The town is also pursuing the elimination of straight pipes. If you don't live on the coast, straight pipes aren't a big problem. But even in Mahone Bay, we still have 9 remaining. But the cost to eliminate them is quite high, but council is committed in its strategic plan to eliminating the few straight pipes that remain. And finally is the town's focus on eliminating water losses from the water treatment systems that the town uses. It's a question of managing or with asset management concepts, dealing with the infrastructure that brings the water to the treatment plant and then takes the water to the individual homes, with a final level of treatment as the water is dispersed again back into the ocean. So most of these things any town can do. They're not cheap, but there aren't many of these items that a citizen can look at it and say, well, that's really not important to me. The trees don't matter. The grass doesn't matter. The water quality doesn't matter. It all matters to us as individuals. And reducing that fossil fuel usage is a key element. And that's what the council, the town council of Mahone Bay for the last 3 years, and now recommitted through the strategic plan for the next 4.5 years, is going to focus on. Thank you.
It's a great overview, David. I'm a citizen of Mahone Bay, so I'm fairly familiar with the good work that's being done in that regard. Really have so much to chew on here tonight, I've got to say. We have one more speaker left, Casey DeLong, introduced earlier as a municipal councillor with the municipality district of Lunenburg. But she's also, I think, just looking across the panel, I think you are the person, Casey, who lives the furthest from, amongst us, who lives the furthest from any municipal center, such as Bridgewater or Mahone Bay or Lunenburg, the actual towns. And so your reflections on transportation and the just recovery are what we're looking forward to. Over to you, Casey.
So that's why you asked me to talk about transportation. I honestly have not been sure this whole time, but I figured I'm game, so I'm here to talk. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. I'm deeply honored because everyone here is shared so deeply, and thank you. And I'm going to preface what I'm about to say with this. I'm here as a resident tonight, not a municipal councillor, so please don't ask me for anything other than my own personal opinions. Yeah, so if you're somebody who is participating in this discussion as a listener or as a panelist tonight, it's because you're committed to a just recovery and to learning about what can be done to transition to a more just and equitable world. Just recovery, not only from the pandemic with which we're still grappling, but its aftershocks with which we will contend for quite some time. Sorry, I've just lost my place here, of course. Also, perhaps, though, we're looking at recovery from many other coinciding crises: environmental degradation, the refugee crisis, lack of affordable housing, wealth inequality, and the list seems endless. If you're here, it's because, like me, you're asking questions about how we get from where we are now to where we need to be, and what tools we might need, what solutions we might build, and who we might call on to be a collaborator. In this tapestry that everyone has been interweaving here tonight, we're all solution builders and we're all people in need of solutions. And I'm going to talk a bit about transportation and how it relates to just recovery, but that's just one factor within many. It's not just one solution we need to an equitable future, obviously. We need many, many solutions coming together, working collaboratively. However, given that I only have 5 minutes, I better speed up, I guess. And I doubt that I'd be able to provide many satisfactory answers to such deep problems, even if I were an expert in transportation, which I'm not. So instead, I'm going to pose some questions about what just transportation or equitable transportation might look like. And hopefully between all of us, we can find some answers and start building solutions. Here are some of the questions I've been pondering when I think about how we can recover justly. Are we commuting as much now? Can we permanently reduce the amount of time that we're on the road? How can we ensure the transition to electrification and away from greenhouse gas emitting vehicles? If we're using vehicles with batteries, what fuel types are we using to charge the vehicles? How can we transition away from power sources that are harmful emitters, such as coal? Do the batteries and components of electric vehicles cause harmful emissions or environmental degradation in their production? I mean, these questions get ever more complicated. On a personal level, are we collaborating with our neighbors in building grassroots solutions? Do we even know our neighbors anymore, or is life too busy, too hectic? Are we carpooling? Are we offering rides to seniors traveling to medical appointments? Probably not during a pandemic. Are we participating in car share programs, transitioning our personal vehicles to electric, using public transit? Are these options even available to us? Can we advocate for them? Can our municipal units participate in finding these solutions? And are those municipal units collaborating? Are they collaborating with their residents, with other municipalities, with other levels of government? If we're going to have a transportation system that benefits not just residents of one particular municipality, but all residents, all neighbors, all people, then we need to be having these conversations. Just recovery will not happen if we're all working in silos. We need to collaborate effectively and work together. So in all likelihood, rather than give any solutions to the problem of just transportation, equitable transportation, I've just added to the ever-growing list of questions that we all have. But by posing some of these questions, perhaps we can find the right people, or better still, perhaps we can become the right people, the solution builders. So now I'd like to hear some of your questions. And perhaps we can start building those solutions together, because we can go further, faster together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Casey. I love that idea of solution builders. We definitely need those people, don't we? I've been making notes on everything that I could that people were saying, and I picked on a number of comments that we could follow up on in our next 15 minutes or half an hour. I've also been watching the YouTube fans pitching in with some comments, and I've got one question here in particular that came in quite early from Timothy Tanner, and I think I'm going to put the mayor of Mahone Bay on the spot with this one, because the question was, how do you feel about what's happening with the Biodiversity Act? How do you feel about this or another act to include our marine ecosystems? So, David, this is a kind of a political question, but I'm sure you've been following the news about the Diversity Act, which was brought forward with great fanfare, but has changed a bit now before it's going forward to the legislature. So that, I think I'm probably fair to pass that question on to you, although anybody else could also chime in. Any thoughts on that, David? And don't forget to unmute. Oh, you are still muted. There we go.
Okay. Council did address the issue of the marine environment. In fact, the council is on record as being opposed to open net fish farms, which was the issue that polarized the group around the industrialization that's happening in our waters and the concern that council has that the life of that water, the life of the ocean, is being threatened. We're also looking at things like the moratorium on drilling on the North Slope in the Atlantic. And that is becoming an issue of focus and discussion for council. So I would have to suggest, although there's been nothing in particular that has been addressed at council around the bill, there are issues in the forestry industry that are of concern to individual councillors and may in fact find its way to the council table. And I would hope that council will take whatever steps we can take to maintain our forests and maintain our urban canopies in particular in all the towns. You're on mute, Chris.
That's what happens when you try to watch the chats coming in and lose track of this form. There was a nice comment earlier on that is not a question, but I just wanted to read it because I think it's worth being heard. It was from Sue Bookchin, who said, "This is so great. Thank you all for doing this. Such an important community conversation for citizens and their elected representatives to be having together." And this one from Stuart Frank, thanks for the comments and questions with respect to public transit. We at Citizens for Public Transit continue to promote a regional public transit system to serve Bridgewater, Lunenburg, and Mahone Bay. I like to think we're all familiar with the good work that the Citizens for Public Transit has done in trying over many years to get a more fulsome transport system available to the entire county, but as Stuart went on to say, and the other populated areas of modal, such as way out where Casey lives, for instance. I don't see any other questions right at this time, so maybe I'll just pick up on, or give you the opportunity, sorry, to pick up on what any of our other spokesmen were saying, or any thought that you've had while these discussions were going along. So I think we're now on the view that allows us to see all of us in YouTube, which is great, instead of just a speaker. So you've heard a huge range of topics, and as I say, I've made some notes, but I'm wondering while any of you were listening to any of the others speak, if there was something you particularly wanted to pick up on, or if you feel you omitted anything that you would like to add. So I'm just going to look to see if there's any raised hands at this point. And Francis.
Just thought I'll break the silence. One of the things that I picked up on, and I think hopefully everybody does, is how the systems in place have systematically created a structure that basically doesn't serve us. And I think that's pretty clear in many ways, that we need to be awoken to the fact that the systems are supposed to serve us, and not the other way. We are not supposed to serve the systems, and we as citizens and people who are concerned need to find ways in which we can hold systems accountable, and to a certain extent find ways to change them in whatever sphere of or area of influence we have. I think we all, so the I guess circle of concern is very big. There's so many things we need to change, but if we individually in our spheres of influence, we can push systems that we work with, we can push systems that we can interact with to change and be different, not go back to normal, because normal was abnormal from my perspective. If we can push systems to change so that they actually serve us, and I'm not saying do what they're supposed to do, because some systems were set up to do wrong things. I'm talking about systems that really serve the people who are here and future generations. Then I think we can get some change, and to a certain extent, it's even a call to everyone, and not just municipal leaders, that for these systems to actually respond, we have to be actively involved at the very local level. So this is my very first time in local municipal government, and I think one of the things I'm learning is that without that local participation and people in the community pushing us to do better, it can become very difficult for us to actually move things forward. So yeah, that's what I thought I'd share.
System change is a lot of what we're talking about, and you were talking about it in your particular remarks as well. So I'm glad you highlighted that for us. I saw also a hand from Elspeth and Lisa, so we'll go to Elspeth first, and Casey.
There are three people here who are involved in municipal politics, Francis and Mayor Devaney and Casey. And a number of us have referred to the need for new systems and of collaboration. And I would like to hear comments around what you feel are possibilities of new systems that could offer up some ways of better collaboration, because I feel on so many fronts this is not happening, and it needs to happen, and we can't do the things that we're all asking for and advocating for unless we have a better governance system, a better system of collaboration. And I don't necessarily think I have the answer, but I'd like to hear from the elected officials how they feel about that kind of a comment.
Can I address this, or?
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Elspeth, thank you so much. That definitely resonates with how I feel about it. It's one of the reasons that I threw my hat in, because I was very concerned about, well, on the climate emergency front, the lack of networked collaboration, for lack of a better term. There's no shortage of goodwill to changing the systems. There's no shortage of talented people working. It's just a matter of getting them working together and getting them out of their silos, I think. And the people who are interested in that are making those moves and trying to find like-minded people. But there's no good overarching framework that I've come across in which to do it. I mean, what are you going to use? Facebook? It's hard to find your people and then work effectively together. And I don't have the answer either, but it's definitely something that I've given a fair bit of thought. I'd be interested to hear from what the other electeds have to say.
David or Francis want to weigh in on that?
David, you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You go ahead, Francis.
Okay. One of the things for me is that the last few months have been a steep learning curve, in the sense that there are things that I thought I knew when I was on the other side, and there are things that I'm learning now that maybe are shaping the way I think about things. So I'm taking this as a learning period for myself. But I think one of the crucial things for me is in my nature, in my experience at work, relationships break barriers. And even before running for council, I attempted to ensure that I can start building the relationships that would be necessary. and have key relationships with other members of council who are not in the town of Mahone Bay. And I think I'm making progress on that. And my hope is that through that process, then there can be shoots of hope around how do we think differently about things that can be, we can do better than the individual parts that we have, and then figure out which areas are we stuck in that are probably holding us back from seeing, I guess, the potential of working together. And so I would say right now for me, it's sort of an assessment of where we are at and what kinds of barriers exist, and being able to actually articulate them in a way that other people maybe can relate to, and now start figuring out things. And so Casey and I have had conversations around systemic racism, and then the question, well, why is the town of Bridgewater doing something separate? Why doesn't it become a regional thing? Why is town of Lunenburg doing something separate? And those are good questions, but there's a reason why that's happening. That I think maybe even through that work, there can be sort of examples of how small, I would call them study cases can be shown to work, that are easy to adopt and can create a synergy for working together. Yeah, so the various conversations like that. Housing, I think we were struggling back in the day to get municipal councillors together to talk about housing. I think that has already started, and Casey is part of that group. So there are shoots of hope with the change in council. And the only thing I can say, we are committed to doing things differently. I don't know how that will look, but we are committed to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in terms of collaboration, which is what we're talking about, because I'm certainly aware there's also a similar, not quite sure if it's called anti-racism committee, but exists in the town of Lunenburg as well. So this is an area where, yes, maybe every municipality needs to have their own focus on issues like discrimination, but we also need that kind of collaboration as well. So I'm glad that the conversations are going on. I did have a hand up from Lisa earlier on. I don't want to miss that one, Lisa. I don't know what topic you were thinking of, but over to you for a minute.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking along when we were talking about the environmental things, and how everything, like even the issues of like lack of housing and poverty impact environment, and the decrepit housing stock that we have impacts environment, and how so many of the issues that we've talked about today, it all is so intertwined. And that whole idea that we want to change our systems, it's not impossible. It just takes a lot of political will and a lot of people who are willing to stop, like as Art said, blaming the individuals who are poor and who are accessing our systems, and actually look at what's causing these root issues. And I also think it's really important too that when we're talking about like environmental sustainability, we are living on unceded land of our caretakers who have throughout history been able to do so many things in environmental sustainability. We have that knowledge here. And I think as part of, the Truth and Reconciliation Act, and in taking that seriously, is asking our the caretakers of this land to be given their rights back, and to have those accesses back to them. And I think that addresses, the discrimination that we see in just how our Indigenous people are treated. And I wanted to just kind of say that I'm sure that that's happening, but I think that we have to start taking these things seriously. And when we communities start taking things like the Truth and Reconciliation Act seriously, the recommendations, seriously, that's when we will start actually addressing some of these systemic issues that are happening in our government, and in the multiple systems, in how our housing is developed and how our zoning happens. I think we just have to really dig deep into what this is going to mean, because we can't go back to the way things were. It's not working for so many of us. It's creating very unhealthy communities where we're losing our children to urban centers, where they're not thriving, where families are failing. It's not working. And so we have to be serious about how we're moving forward. And I truly believe that looking at what's in our communities and the land that we're on and the rightful caretakers of it, and looking to their knowledge to lead us, that is going to help shape and change where we are. So I wanted to add that because I feel it's important. It's an important thing to acknowledge, and that's it.
In fact, Lisa, your comments are very powerful and almost make a kind of a good place to end, because although we haven't have any solutions, you've certainly summed up the challenge. And when you talked about the political will and following the Indigenous knowledge for leadership, I think that obviously when we're talking about a session called a session about how municipalities can provide a just recovery, that's the crux of it, isn't it? Is first of all, we have to have the will, and then we have to have the wisdom. I've been following the chat and question side of things, and great to see that we did get up to just over 30 people watching in, which is good. And as I said, this will be available recently. I want to do sort of very briefly my own kind of summation, because some points really stuck with me, and I hope everybody who was listening found some points that they can take away. But just very briefly, when Lisa was speaking, the idea of creating land banks really stuck with me. And Elspeth, with municipalities' role in creating infrastructure, because I think we often think of infrastructure as such a big thing, can only be done by the feds or the province, but making sure that your own citizens have access to internet should be a priority. I like, with Francis, there was so much that I was taking away there, but when you led off by saying we can get people into space, but we can't eliminate discrimination, that says it all for me. Art, I really found your contributions very meaningful. What Lisa said about blaming individuals for poverty, certainly stuck with me, but also your idea about having youth involved in building housing. We need the housing, and youth can build, they can learn those skills. And if the median age right now is 46 years, we've got to do better than that. David, I always enjoy hearing that Mahone Bay is trying to play a leadership role in environmental issues, but I also like hearing you talk about protection of agriculture. We don't see a lot of farmers within our area, but we all depend on farmers. And I like to think we would like to eliminate pesticides and provide more healthy food going forward, as it's something we all need. Casey, collaborating with our neighbors, car sharing, carpools. Do we know our neighbors? Those are pretty powerful questions coming from rural Nova Scotia, because I think there's sort of a presumption in the city that, they're out there, they all know each other, they all support each other, they all take care of each other. I like to think many people do. I hope so, because how do you get from New Germany for an appointment in Bridgewater if you don't have the ability to drive or a vehicle other than to count on your neighbors? But it's not as simple as that. We need transportation that actually allows us to move towards a just recovery, and we don't necessarily have that in our rural areas now. So that's kind of my summary. We are at 8:20. I did say we would try to conclude by about 8:15, but I also said that we could go on a little bit longer. So if somebody feels they had something they wanted to say that they haven't been able to say yet, we could take a couple more minutes. I'm just looking around at the panelists here for any raised hands. Last remarks? I think we're good. All right. Please do just go back and look at the chats here for a second. Hold on. We do have other comments. From Marion Moore says, thanks, Chris, the town of Mahone Bay, and especially the amazing panelists. South Shore Council of Canadians is committed to continuing to work for just recovery. We're working with our friends at the South Shore Extinction Rebellion to build on the work started tonight. If you're interested in being part of this, please contact us at southshore.coc@gmail.com. And she said she was very encouraged by tonight. So that's, thank you, Marion. I went over that a bit quickly, southshore.coc@gmail.com. And you can also follow up with the town of Mahone Bay. I'm sure that's very easy to pose comments or questions to the mayor and council there in Mahone Bay. So just before I sign off, since we are co-hosting this with the town of Mahone Bay, David, any last comments?
Yes. In reference to Deputy Mayor Kangata's comment about the learning curve, this is my 13th year on council, and the learning curve is probably steeper today than it was 12 and a half years ago. It's always a learning process for me, and I think for the members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to participate tonight and to hear some thoughts around the table from other people interested in the directions that the Council of Canadians is showing us. And I would appreciate any feedback about the town of Mahone Bay that you would like to offer myself or Deputy Mayor Kangata. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks again to Elspeth, Francis, Lisa, Art, David, and Casey for taking part in this. And special thanks, you can't really see her because it just says Mahone Bay, but special thanks to Mahone Bay staffer Kelly Redden, who handled all the technical things this evening. And yes, keep in mind again that the YouTube link that is easily available through the town of Mahone Bay's website is a way for people to watch this event after the fact. So please do share that with friends and supporters and people who you think might benefit from hearing the discussion we had tonight. And now I will leave you all to wave goodbye and hopefully see you around. Good night, everybody.